Hi, this is Misha, and this is part 2 in our look at the Polish AK series. Originally this was all just going to be one big video, but as often happens with us, it just turned into a too long video. Part 1 was on the 7.62-39 guns and really took us through the 1970s. So on part 2 we're going to look at the 5.45 and what came after and talk about current offerings out of Poland today. Now on the table first is the rather famous Polish WZ, or I should say KBK WZ-88 Tantal. And this is often referred to as a Polish AK-74. It really is not. Poland took its own tactic. If you haven't noticed from part 1, they would sometimes copy Russian designs, and other times they would make large variations of their own, even sometimes more or less their whole own design. As we said there, in 1974 they adopted an underbarrel grenade launcher, which finally led to the old milled KBKG guns going out of service, and pretty much a complete shift over to the AKM and the recently at that time introduced AKMS underfolder, this one over here. After that, well actually right before 1973 give or take, there was a push to replace 7.62-39 in Poland. The experimental caliber was known by 7x41 millimeter, so it was a radical departure and really was supposed to be a proprietary Polish round. I can't help but think of the Czech 7.62x45 cartridge back from the 50s. Of course, as with that, the Soviets got wind of it and said niet. It was not going to happen. They wanted standardization. So Poland didn't really have a whole lot of choice. 1980, the whole Lantan program, which was an experimental rifle program, was axed, and there was great pressure from Soviet Russia just to adopt the 5.45 round and the AK-74 for Poland just to make copies in-house at Radom Factory 11. However, Russia had seen what nations like Poland and East Germany and even China had done with the original AK and AKM designs, how they were making inroads on the world market, selling or trading off guns. And so by the time of the AK-74, they really tightened up the licensing. They would allow their client states to manufacture the AK-74s, but they would not allow them to sell them on the world market. Russia wanted to be in charge of that because they were trying to push the new 5.45 round, and they were trying to gain influence. I mean, if you can get in selling a country its military arms, you have an influence over their policies. This is why most major nations have always tried to have a domestic arms industry, to have that independence. Poland did not want to be under Soviet Russia's thumb, so they went about essentially reverse engineering the AK-74 and even to some extent the 5.45x39 M74 cartridge, and that's where the Tantal comes from. There was an aborted prototype known as the WZ-80. It's important because it featured a 3-round burst option, so a 3-way selector. Well, in 1981, the first Tantal, which was the name of the project, prototypes were ready to go. The early forerunner of this gun here. These would have a folding stock. They would have a fixed and folding bipod as standard. They would have the 3-way selector from the WZ-80. And of course they would fire 5.45. So the prototypes are ready in 81. However, there was a lot of political and social unrest in Poland at the end of that year. And so this put that project and many others on hold. They would eventually pick back up in late 82 at Radom, and they would start to hit some production problems. They were finding it more difficult to tool up and work out the kinks. It was just more than they bargained for in the beginning. They really saw how difficult it was to fine-tune a whole rifle system. So there were delays. The first Tantals failed Polish military trials, for example. This drug on until 1985, 86. They would also, by the mid-80s, introduce a short carbine version, analogous to, say, like the Soviet AKS-74U Krink, which would later be known as the Onyx program. So they will see a shorter version available as far as the full size. They would keep tinkering with it. By 87, guns are starting to pass trials, and by 88, we have the version that would be adopted. It would be, as I said, the KBK WZ-88, adopted in 1988, and would start to see production, and the first ones hit the military in 1989. So what do we have here? Well, we have a 16-inch barrel, chrome line, cold hammer forged, the usual. We have a 90-degree gas block here. Interestingly, we have this lug on it that allows for this detachable bipod. They went away from the fixed one that was on the early prototypes to a clip-on one, basically stolen off the M16A1. It just clips onto this lug here, and it would be stored in a side pocket of the mag pouch here. You see this large pocket. Just keep your bipod there. We have a thin cleaning rod under the barrel. I mention it because this is actually a much smaller, thinner, lighter cleaning rod compared with the standard AK-74. We have an accessory lug here for an underbarrel grenade launcher. We have a standard bayonet lug up here. We also are capable of firing rifle grenades, which is something the Polish military is very interested in. This device is a very interesting device in how it attaches. Back here you see the grenade ring. It also acts as a muzzle brake, and to some extent even flash hider. You have ports here and then slots, and then of course the bayonet mounts on. Now you would think the barrel would end right here, and this is all, no. This actually, the barrel is 16 inches. It's just this front sight base is moved closer to the gas block, and the barrel actually comes all the way out to about right here inside this device. And this is for stability. This is a very stable device. There's no movement. And to even make sure, there's even a kind of a washer in between the sight base and the device to ensure a tight fit and that it times up. I'm sure they just tried different washers until they found one that timed it right at 12 o'clock because there's no play. So that's kind of interesting. Moving back, we have a very interesting handguard set. We have this here, which is a quick throw lever. Rotate it, and then this goes forward, and then your hand guards come off. See, this bottom just comes off too. This not only allows for fast cleaning, it also allowed for easy installation of that underbarrel grenade launcher we're concerned about. So it's an interesting way. I mean, compared, anyone who's ever taken off the handguards on a standard AK knows they can be a bit of a pain. Here we are with something, this one's relatively loose. Some of them you might need a bullet tip or a screwdriver to rotate that, but it's secure, but it lets you get to them very easily. The upper handguard is made of kind of a brown plastic. It's kind of a matte material. The bottom is what we would call Bakelite. It's actually a AG4 material, reinforced fiberglass. We have a rear sight that has a cutout for a vial of tritium for night use. This one has the ribbed dust cover. Some are also made with a smooth dust cover. We have a locking latch in the back, just as on the KBKG, the mill gun, to keep it from the dust cover from flying off during grenade launching. We have a standard AK safety, and that's all this is a safety. Because on this side, we have a selector switch. This is a separate switch. This is not a safety. It lets you set from single to 3 round to full auto. There's a separate control with your safety on the other side. This takes standard AK-74 type mags, although these are AKM pattern. They're just smaller for the 5.45 round. These are the steel ones, the early style. I can do it, guys. Standard AK catch. We have a standard Bakelite style pistol grip. And in the back we have a side folding wire stock. Let me get it here, guys. Boy, I'm not doing things at the right angles today, am I? Trying to fold it over towards me and it didn't work. This stock is really stiff on this one. Has the lever with serrations on it. And to even further reinforce this stock for grenade launching, it's held in not only with a screw and a grip plate, but also a roll pin, actually 2 roll pins, one on each side. So it's a very secured stock, yet it fits into a standard rear trunnion. The idea was you could easily put a standard wood or polymer stock in to have a fixed stock gun, and originally that was the idea, to issue these with folding and fixed stocks both. In practice, since not many Tantals ended up being made, they were all folders from the factory, at least as far as I know, aside from prototypes and whatnots. This is still on a standard 1.0 stamped receiver. This is a Nodak made one, of course, to be semi-auto. And internally, we have a pretty standard bolt group and everything else. What they did, this has elements of the AK-74, such as the 90-degree gas block, but much like with the Romanian PA-86 and a lot of other ways, this is kind of a reworked AKM scaled down for 5.45. And in the end, even though it took them nearly a decade to come up with it, they did turn out a very good, dependable rifle, if also a little bit odd looking in the furniture department. So, 1988. Things are looking good. 1989, we start to see the military get the first examples. And then, essentially, communism falls apart in Eastern Europe, including Poland. So what do? Well, the military has already placed an order. Radom has invested exponential resources and time. And they start to deliver these in large batches in 1990 to the military, running through 91 and into 92. I've read as late as 94, but either way. The gun itself was a good, if not terribly modern gun by the 90s. It wasn't outdated yet, but it wasn't super modern. We're still firing at small caliber, high velocity, of course. The problem was the caliber. Throughout Eastern Europe, 5.45 was not liked. Not because it necessarily was a bad caliber, but because it was a very clear sign of Soviet domination and control. So even while these were still being shipped to the Polish military as new guns, they were already politically undesirable because Poland was wanting to get away from the authoritarian regime that had dominated it really since before World War II in one way or the other. Remember, it wasn't just Nazi Germany that had invaded Poland, it was Russia too. So they had been under Russian control, domination for a very long time. But again, since the military had already made a commitment, they would acquire around 25,000 Tantals from Radom. Now I put in a later production mag. This is the early steel. This is the later style fiberglass reinforced polymer. And very late Tantals would even have black polymer furniture too. Pistol grip, handguard. So there are a few minor variations. good guns, but the timing was sucked. If they had been really adopted in 1981, 82 when they first were planned to, they would have had somewhat of a long service career. As it was, already by 1994, the Polish military declared 545 obsolete and declared 7.6239 a substitute standard again. So already, only after a few years and, just a couple, they still had brand new guns in inventory at that time that never even were taken out. This is why so many of the Tantal kits are in great shape. They just didn't see much use because they weren't desirable. Plus, the military did have a good number of AKMs such as this, or AKMSs in this one's case. In fact, they would order more the final batch of AKMSs from Factory 11, Lucznik Radom, in 1995. And they would appear just like this one, except they would have black pistol grips instead of the later brown or red. So they would be ordering more of the older guns later than the Tantals, interestingly. They would also, in the late 90s, introduce a black polymer type magazine for the 7.62 with the Circle 11 marked on it. We'll talk about these more in a minute when we get to the next section. But I just find the Tantal very interesting for what it is and what it represents. Well, we've got pouches out. This is a later style 3-cell that Poland was using for a long time. And with the Tantal, they went to a 4-cell. It holds 4 30-round mags. Have a large cleaning kit compartment on the side. And as I showed earlier, the compartment for the bipod on this side. I'll put it in, why not? So even as these were going in, no one really wanted them in Poland. So, very short history. As for the Onyx, the short barrel, it was type classified as the Wz.89. However, only a few hundred, and I do mean like 100, 150 prototypes were made and never really saw much use or adoption. So, 25,000 Tantals isn't a big number, but at least it did see field use. The Onyx really didn't get outside of that much at all because of the Tantal. And those were the last really gasps of, the first and the last gasps of 545 in Poland. Pretty short career. They never did do an RPK or a light machine gun in it, as far as I know. It was just the Tantal and to a limited extent the Onyx. So moving on, we jump to this critter. This is the KBS Wz.96, and this is the 96C Beryl. This is current issue today in Poland. So how did we get from the Tantal here to this here? These are actually much more related than you might think. As I said, the 545 cartridge was already very much out of favor by the time the Tantal was going into service. 91 was a big year of change for Poland. Communism was falling. The Warsaw Pact fell apart. In August, Boris Yeltsin came to power in Russia and began to withdraw troops from various client states, including Poland. So Russian troops started to leave Polish soil. Just as a side note, the last ones were gone before the fall of 93, so it took a little time, but not a huge amount. To kind of get in with the new market of the future, what the Lucznik factory did was to take the Tantal and rework it to fire 5.56 NATO. They would also rework the Onyx, and they would designate this as the Wz.91. They would show off examples, and the Polish military looked at it, but it really wasn't what they needed because it wasn't a purpose-built 5.56 gun. You know, it was a rework for the commercial market, but they wanted to have something. They were trying to get something back out of all those years and all the money put into the Tantal program. So, we have the Wz.91. As I said, in 94, the Polish military already declared 5.45 obsolete. Also, the former communist states in Eastern Europe were invited to join NATO. So Poland had this goal to join NATO by 2000 and to adopt the 5.56 NATO cartridge. So the idea was to have a new military issue, standard issue rifle firing the NATO standard round. Now we have quite a few videos on the Beryl, so I'm just going to breeze through this here. We've got a 40-minute one just on the Beryl alone, and it's a pretty long and very interesting history. This gun is a heavily reworked Tantal in a lot of ways. The military told Radom it wanted a new rifle capable of mounting optics, capable of firing 5.56, capable of 3-round burst and full automatic, so on and so forth. It also needed to be the same size and general weight as the Tantal and AKMS. It was supposed to be ready by the end of 95. Radom went over the time frame a little bit, but they had some prototypes by January, and by May of that year it was in trials and was quickly on its way to being adopted. In 97, it was officially adopted as the Wz.96, and the Beryl, for beryllium, was the code name of the project. Now we'll throw up some pictures. The original Wz.96 and 96A looked much more like a Tantal. These guns have gone through many generational changes. They would start to replace, basically as soon as they had the Beryl, they immediately said hurrah, and got rid of the Tantals as quick as they could. So the Tantals were the first to be put into reserve and then sold off as surplus. So for a time the AKM AKMS was de facto standard in Poland while they were switching to the Beryl. And as time would go on, more and more of it entered service. So what is this? Again, this is a Wz.96. This is my Archer. It's set up as a Wz.96C. We'll start from the butt, just because. The original Beryls had a side-folding stock. The newer ones have this 4-position adjustable stock, and Radom has offered a folding adjustable as an option. We're very much on the same receiver as the Tantal, 1mm. We have just a safety selector on the side here. And we have a fire mode selector on this side here, same as the Tantal. These handguards might not look Tantalish, but the mount's the same. We still have the quick throw lever here to take these off. They're just updated versions. The gas block is basically identical. The 90 degrees, we even have the lug for the bipod. No cleaning rod under the barrel. We have an 18-inch as opposed to 16-inch barrel as standard. Still chrome lined, hammer forged. Front sight bases here. We have a muzzle brake capable of launching rifle grenades. And interestingly, this is pinned onto the barrel in the same fashion as the front sight base and gas block. Not screwed on. This was done for accuracy. Now I could stand here all day talking about the evolutionary changes that have been introduced into this gun. And that's for that other video. I will say that around the turn of the millennium, the old Lucznik factory was in a little bit of a financial crunch, and in 2002 declared bankruptcy. it would essentially shutter its doors for a brief period of time and then reorganize and open back up. The assets were transferred over to a new company, FB Radom, which we know today, which was also the pre-war name of the same factory. So essentially it was more or less a name change and restructuring. Same building, some of the same employees. They took this opportunity to update their equipment. A lot of the older tooling was left over from the Soviet era. It was worn out or just outdated, outmoded. They bought new computer-controlled tooling. And so this is where a lot of the more updated Beryl stuff comes from. Just to look at this one as an example, we already showed the stock. A lot of the controls, such as the selector, the mag release, and the safety, have larger shelves and areas to make them more ergonomic. We've added an ambidextrous front sling swivel on the right side as well as the left. Now I have the original pattern handguards on. We would go to some rails. I laid it around here somewhere. If I grabbed it, maybe I didn't, doesn't matter. But there's several, here it is. You know, this is one of the earlier styles of handguard with rails. We have short rails made of polymer. We also have a vertical pistol grip at the bottom. This was the original style of pistol grip, the black, which would appear on the late underfolders. Newer handguards are made of metal with the quick removable grip. Speaking of grip, this is the newer pattern ergonomic grip, also ambidextrous, has cutouts for thumbs on either side, quite a bit larger. Magazines originally were the same black pattern as Tantal. They were just slightly tweaked for 5.56, still just black. Later we would go to the more famous green mags. Come out of the pouch here. There we go. Just as a note, as I said, there's not a cleaning rod under the barrel. Instead, a two-piece rod is stored in the mag pouch over there. And the reason they did that was for the different handguards to be swapped out more easily. A lot of the newer handguards wouldn't allow for a cleaning rod to go through them. We went to these green translucent mags. Same pattern, just a modern material. There was a transitional clear mag, but it wasn't very good and was only in production for a very brief period of time. These mags started to appear around 2008, 2009. They're still current issue today. Another thing, obviously, is the scope mount on this gun. Just putting my stuff up, guys. This rail system is really the Beryl's claim to fame. It forks and meets on either side of the rear sight base, and it locks in the back on top of your riveted in rear trunnion for a very, very secure mount. Quit trying to pop off on me there. See? It's a very secure mount. It's kind of like the quick change levers on a standard AK side rail. This is the latest generation that has a little bit of a high rail. It's got a trough in the middle so you can still use your iron sights. And it's a lighter weight. Some of the earlier rails were not Picatinny compatible, or some are short. There's a whole variation of rails. On it I've got an EOTech 552, which is as close to standard issue as the Beryl has seen in Poland. They've used quite a few different optical devices on these nighttime magnifiers. Lots of stuff, but this red dot is a good example of standard issue for them. A lot of these changes and adaptations were made in experience in Afghanistan and Iraq. As Poland would draw closer to the west, it would send troops to assist coalition allied forces in both of those conflicts. And so as soldiers gave feedback, the new FB Radom would respond by making changes, most of them ergonomic, you know, to the point. And this is where things like the Wz.96A, the Wz.96B, and now the Wz.96C come from. Each of those is a generational upgrade. And what's nice is, since the core rifle is the same, it's able to upgrade older guns to newer standards. By 2015, the Polish military had about 80,000 Beryls, and the smaller crink size version, which is based on the Onyx to some extent, known as the Wz.96 Mini Beryl, in service. At this time, the older AKM and AKMS were phased out and either sold as surplus or simply put in reserve for emergency use. So in active use, we're pretty much all Beryls at this point. Then in June of 2016, the military placed quite a large order for about 25,000 more Beryl and Mini Beryls. And that contract, I believe, is still being fulfilled now. It might be, yeah, I think by now, into 2017, it's done. Either way, at the end of this contract, the Polish military would have approximately 100,000 Beryls in service. So it's entirely rearmed and re-equipped with the Beryl, replacing pretty much all the older guns in service. This is one of the few truly cut, ground up built AKs for 5.56. These are very reliable, exceedingly accurate. With good ammo, they are capable of 1 MOA. Even with military ammo, they're 2 MOA or less, which is extraordinarily good as an average for a military gun, even a Colt M4. This rail system is very flexible. It doesn't add a whole lot of weight, and it's easily removed to use just the iron sights if necessary. These magazines are inexpensive for the Polish military, durable enough, reliable, and there's all kinds of handguards. This is about as modular as you're going to get an AK. Any more than this, and it's probably not really an AK. It's a very durable gun. As I said, it can fire rifle grenades. For that, we have a 3-rivet rear trunnion as opposed to the regular 2. Standard receiver, phosphated finish. So yeah, this is standard issue in Poland still to today. It is essentially a highly updated Tantal, which itself is a reverse engineered AKM redone for 5.45. So it all goes back to that lineage, it really does. And to wrap this episode up, brought a couple of guns back out. Wanted to talk about the status of the Polish AK today on more of the civilian market. Now, again, we have a video on the Archer. Just thought I'd mention, this is the only true 100% built as a functioning gun FB Radom to come over. Unfortunately, these haven't been imported in a couple of years. They came over from IO. They started to sell these 2012, 2013, and all the guns are pretty much dated 2013. Looks like they brought only one batch of about 700 over, and that's it. They still were selling off some old stock about 2 years ago into 2015, beginning of 16, but these are all gone now. And this was the only version to ever come in, just the standard rifle. That's pretty much it. That said, today, FB Radom only really makes the Beryl. They no longer have the tooling, the equipment, or really the desire to make the 7.62 AKMs, any of that. But we have another company, FB, which is also out of Poland, that is making 7.62 3.9 parts. And these are being imported and built up into complete guns by several builders, including Atlantic Firearms. These come over as part sets and are built on US receivers and then with whatever barrel. This one, for example, the WPB CG1, has a Polish barrel made by FB Radom that's brought over as essentially a virgin barrel. So the barrel is Polish, The receiver is a US receiver, but it has Polish markings. Now this particular gun, even though it's a modern production WBP, is kind of dressed up to look like a classic Polish AKM. And I do have a modern WBP magazine. If you notice, it looks very similar to the magazine in this Archer, in this Beryl here. They're both a green polymer material, surprisingly light, inexpensive, and very durable. So this is one option for a Polish gun, and this is current production. Even if FB Radom isn't making the AKM, WBP is making parts for them. So that is nice. Also, parts kits have been coming in. This is that AKMS I showed you earlier. This was built from a matching kit by Allied Armament a few years ago. This is definitely an option. Actually is just a fresh batch of AKM kits that just came in. And you can build these on whatever receiver you want. And finally we have this gun here, which is built from an earlier 1967 dated AKM kit. And these are imported by Arms of America as matching kits. These are older guns that were just recently surplused out. What I've been told from Arms of America is that Poland has surplused out the older guns from the 60s and 70s. And in years past, they already sold off quite a few 80s dated kits like this one. But what they have left, they're going to hang on to. So you can actually find older FB type kits. Of course, they'd be Circle 11 made back then. And you can pair them up with the newer imported virgin FB barrels, which is how this one was done. And how the CG1 over there was done. It's just the only difference between these two. This is built from new production parts. This is built from surplus original parts. There's kind of pros and cons to each. This one in my hands has the history, but the parts are going to show some wear and tear. This one over here is brand new, and the parts are made almost identically to the originals, and as a shooter, it's probably the way to go. As a collectible, this would be the way to go. So even though FB isn't making AKMs anymore in 7.62, they do make the Beryl in it for military customers. Now before we go, the Msbs. I know it'll get mentioned every time you do the Archer, it does. The Msbs was a project that started off as the Radom in 2007 and has been in protracted development ever since. Allegedly by 2015 there were finally some working prototypes, and it's a modular weapons system that's not based on the Kalashnikov. It's closer to like the Bushmaster, the Remington, the Magpul, you might say, ACR, or Masada. Everyone's been saying for the last many years that this is going to be the new military rifle for the Polish military. Well, obviously, sorry guys, long day, hate to repeat myself. Thing is, every year it keeps getting pushed back and back and back. And I'll just remind you that the military just bought 25,000 new Beryls, bringing their total up to 100,000. So I don't think they're in any immediate hurry and have any firm plans to replace all these Beryls that they just got with brand new Msbs's. I think it'll end up being one of those guns that is used by special forces, elite units, and maybe in the wings will be there if needed in the future. But it seems like for now, at least until 2020 or thereabouts or further, they're pretty happy with the Beryl. I'm sure they'd love to replace it, but it works and it's not terribly outdated. The Msbs is a whole new design. It's not an AK, so I'm sure it'll have its own quirks and things, and it's more expensive and production capacity and all that. So the Msbs's future, I think it's safe to say, is not assured. If it ends up being standard issue in the Polish military one day, perhaps, but I don't think it's any time in the next year or two. I think for the foreseeable future, the Beryl will still be very common and standard, with special forces using, as special forces always have, basically whatever the hell they want. They've had all kinds of guns, including the actual ACR, Colt M4s, and so on and so forth. So they've had what they wanted.
The WBP stuff is mostly for civilian consumption. However, WBP is a subcontractor for FB Radom. So some of the parts that they make will appear in Radom's guns. So it's a thing. And of course, any kind of kit build is going to be a good option just because they're built from military parts. And kits are here today, gone tomorrow. So that's pretty much it. Oh, and before someone else comments about imports, Radom USA is dead, guys. Look it up for yourself online. The company was actually dissolved in May of 2017. The company is officially gone. So this isn't my opinion. You can look it up as a matter of public record. So that never happened, and as such will never happen. If another company imports Beryl semi-autos in the future, possibly. I'd love to see it. I'd love to buy one of the pistol versions, which are based on the Mini Beryl. But for now, FB Radom is completely, it's literally gone. So if someone's going to do it, it's not going to be them. So just, again, look it up for yourself. Well, this was part 2 in our look at the Polish military AK. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them below. If you liked the video, please click like. If you haven't already subscribed and could do so, we'd really appreciate that as well. And please tune in again next time for more hopefully interesting content. This is Misha. I'll catch you then.